I think a lot of the learnings can apply to broader groups, but that's mainly the target market we're going for. So just a quick overview. We don't have a lot of time today, but I will go through these 4 things as best I can. First, a little bit about our organization, High Impact Professionals, then the different paths to impact kind of at a high level that you can consider when thinking about impact through an EA lens, then concrete actions you can take along those different paths. And then I made a very quick plan that you can kind of use as a template going forward to think about your impact. And hopefully we'll have some time for questions, Q&A at the end. Okay, so about High Impact Professionals, just very quickly. We were founded 2 years ago through charity entrepreneurship with the insight that around 50% of EAs are professionals, but there was no real organization catering to these professionals at that time. There's stuff like Giving What We Can where you can donate money, but you don't have to be a professional per se. So it felt like a pretty big market gap, if you will, that wasn't being addressed by anybody in the community. And so ever since that time that we founded 2 years ago, we've been looking for a product market fit to serve this community and figure out what they need. And to that end, we have 2 products now that I think are quite applicable to professionals. The first one is our so-called talent directory. This is a directory of professionals, and it's free on our website. You can just sign up. And 100 organizations in the EA ecosystem are using this to source for roles. So they come there and they say like, okay, it's cause neutral. So they might say, let's say animal welfare, they pick as a cause area. They pick people with 10 plus years of experience. They pick people in Poland, and that'll give them a list of people they can reach out to when they want to hire for that role. So I encourage you to sign up if that's applicable for you. Relatedly, we also have a directory for joining the board of an organization or volunteering at an organization, or co-founding a project. So this is all ways where organizations can come and say if they want to find a new board member, they might find you there if you're on that list. So you can check those out. It's all for free. And the second thing we have is relatively new. It's our Impact Accelerator program. And this is a 6-week program for professionals. And we're guiding 20 professionals through this right now. It looks like each week building a bit of an impact plan, like figuring out what career is right for me. Should I switch into this job, or should I do earning to give? Or maybe I want to do a combination of being an advisor and staying in my current role, and kind of thinking through this process. And then importantly, it's split out into cohorts of 5 people. And each week there's a virtual session with those 5 people, and they have a so-called mastermind session where one person is in the hot seat and they say, gosh, my main barrier to impact is I have imposter syndrome, and I just like this community of smart people. I feel like I'm never going to get a job, so why should I apply? That's just one particular example. And then through the wisdom of the crowds, people will try to address that problem and help that person out very concretely in terms of their impact plan. And this maybe differentiates us, I think, from other like so-called fellowships in the EA space, where we really try to be action-oriented and we try to like say, okay, what is your actual barrier and how can we address that, as opposed to it being information heavy. Ours is less on the information side, so less like learning and philosophy, and more like, okay, let's get you from A to B. All right, enough about me and my org. I want to say one thing before we begin on this sort of action-oriented note. My goal of this talk is that you do something you otherwise wouldn't have done. And I don't care what it is, I'll present a bunch of things, but I hope that you find something that you can grab onto and then take an action as a result of this. I didn't come here to just talk about this stuff, and I know these conferences there's a lot of information and it takes time and swimming in your head and you have to organize things, but I really would like you to take a concrete action, and I can help you think through that in my office hours or otherwise. But a little bit on the nose, but that's my goal of the talk. With that, let's move on. That's all the kind of other things out of the way. We can move on to the meat of the talk. Paths to impact. So you can think of paths to impact as impact is this thing up top. Do I have a light here? I'll just push a button I'm scared of. Okay, it worked. Here's impact and here's working professionals, and you want to get between the two, right? You can picture it kind of in this map way. The first big way in my mind that you as a professional can have an impact is through money. You can use your money to donate to effective organizations so that they can undertake their activities and make a difference in the world. You can use your time and skills similarly with an organization so that they can undertake their activity to make a difference in the world. And something I won't go into this talk because it's shorter than the normal pitch is you can influence your current workplace so that either the organization or people that work at the organization can use their money or their time and skills to influence organizations, which then influence the world. Or you can even, in certain levered positions, can actually change the trajectory of what the organization does in a way that they're more impactful. So a very quick example of this last thing is we heard consultants working with a hedge fund that was investing in alternative proteins, and they convinced them to go to this industry more than they otherwise would, not tricking them in any way. They made a very good business case for that, but they were able to fund things that otherwise might not have been funded. And I think this is a great example of using your private sector job to influence the world. But today, like I said, we'll go into the first couple paths. So just going back quickly, we'll go to the money path and the time and skills path. Maybe kind of cross-cutting concerns that you can think about as a professional are deepening your EA engagement. You're at a conference, so maybe I'm preaching to the choir here. This is one way to do that. You can obviously also read literature, go to the forum, do a fellowship, kind of increase your knowledge about things and maybe fix your trajectory a bit so that you're more aligned with something very impactful. You can also build up your career capital. You can build your skills over time. That's obviously always a good thing to do and robustly good. And build your credentials so that you can get into a higher leverage position in the future. But importantly, and tying in with the action-oriented theme, these things aren't impact in and of themselves, and they're just instrumental to impact. And I see a lot of people kind of get stuck in this loop, and there's also the real risk of value drift. And so you really want to make sure that you're actually having impact, and it's just not nice ideas that are in your head. And you don't want to have this idea of this nebulous future where you're maybe running an EA organization in 10 years' time, and you're just building a path there, and that's when you'll have your real impact. I really want to encourage you to take steps along the way that are true signals that you want to be impactful. And kind of with the theme of this conference, I think it tied in quite nicely of like getting shit done and like actually really doing things. I really would love to see more EAs actually undertaking things and less philosophizing. Philosophizing has an important role in EA, but it's not the whole picture, and we need much more doers. So really encourage you to do that. I'll be hitting that point like 10 times in this talk, so that can be your main takeaway. Okay, concrete actions you can undertake. Then let's jump into the money aspects. Maybe before we jump here, money is more important than it ever was. There have never been many pillars of funding inside of EA, and we have fewer pillars than we've ever had. And I really think it's important to make the funding ecosystem not only flush, but more diversified than it is. So the amount of money is one thing, but the diversity of money is another thing. And we need many people donating to many different cause areas and thinking like in terms of risk appetite, like funding early stage things or maybe later stage things need more funding. There's like a lot of gaps if you really break it down by different dimensions. So this is all to say that money is very, very important and I think has been traditionally undervalued in the community and maybe still is. And you might have seen this sort of thing before from Giving What We Can, but I'm going to repeat it anyway because every time I go to this, I'm struck by it. So I took the average income post-tax of a software developer in Poland, which is apparently 73,000 zloty. And an astounding fact is that if you make this salary, you're richer than 98% of the world, essentially. And it probably doesn't feel that way. And as somebody who's made a whole bunch of salaries and a whole bunch of ranges, I can tell you that you never feel particularly rich and you always compare yourself to the next group. So I come from the US where, people wring their hands at billionaires and there's the 1%, like we have to tax them more, but nobody actually feels like they're the 1%. And probably a lot of people in this room are close to it. I certainly don't want to generalize and say everybody's in this situation, but like you're probably more well off than you think you are. And this is a really strong case for me to donate. And like similarly, if you were to donate 10% of your income, as Giving What We Can asks you to do, you might think, oh, that will make a big hit to my standard of living, but you'd still be in the top 97%. You'd still have 13 times the global median income, but you will have almost saved one healthy life. So if you do this for 2 years, you will have actually saved a life. And as referenced in the opening talk, I really do like this vision of the burning building. Like you picture you're walking down the street and you see a burning building and you see somebody screaming inside, help me, and you bust in and save this person. You pull them out of the flames. It's like definitely one of the things that you would remember on your deathbed as the top 5 most meaningful things you can do in your life. And even as I look at this number, I think it's just like a statistic. It doesn't hit me in the same way, but it's very important to connect these things. Like with 2 years, with this marginal giving, you can actually have that impact. And you can have that every 2 years. And this is just with this as an example salary. Obviously, your particular numbers and situation are different, but the general point remains that with very little money, you can have a very big impact on the world. Quickly to a couple other aspects you want to think about when you donate. Where you give is very, very important because some charities are orders of magnitude better than others. So taking that decision seriously is very important. You should try to use a re-granting organization, as they're called, where possible. And as I understand it, this is being set up in Poland at the time. I'm not sure if it's already live. Maybe somebody can tell me or knows. I think it's Więcej Dobra or something like this. And that will allow you to get a donation receipt for your donation, and then you can essentially donate more than you otherwise could. Again, if you come to my office hours, if you want more details, I'll keep this relatively high level due to timing. You want to take advantage of any matching that your organization has. So a lot of organizations these days have benefits like donation matching. If your organization doesn't have it, this would be a great example of something you can do in your workplace to try to influence it. Like try to get these systems set up. Say more and more younger people are interested in having meaning and blah, 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 and want to have these sorts of programs in place and just try to like push for these initiatives in your organization. And maybe the last point is to invest time relative to the amount donated. So if you're donating a relatively large amount, you probably want to spend more thoughts about where that's going. If you're donating a relatively small amount, maybe you want to give something to something like GiveWell, where you can just like make the transfer and be done with it. Moving on to using your time and skills. Okay, so yeah, as you can see here, you use your time and skills to affect organizations, and then that affects their impact. I put 5 different things that I think are the main ways to do this on this list in maybe decreasing obvious order. So the first one I think is most obvious. I see most EAs go, gosh, I really want to work for a high impact organization. This is like the gold standard or the dream. And I think this is like, there's truth to this because this is very important. I think for most people, if you can get a job at a high impact organization, that's probably the most impactful thing you can do. All else equal. We need people to do impactful work, and as 80,000 hours implies with the name, you have 80,000 hours to work, and that's just a lot of life energy that you can put into a project compared to the other options you can do. That being said, it's quite difficult to get a job often, so it's not super easy for everybody. Compared to donations, where I think like donations is a so-called high absorbency path. A lot of people can do that and donate at different levels and have impact that way. But nonetheless, I think this is a good thing to go for if you can get it. Volunteering and pro bono work is also quite good, but it can be tricky. So we've seen and we've heard from other organizations that if you volunteer, like let's say 2 hours a week at an organization, you probably won't be delivering a lot of value. But if you can scale this up to maybe 1 day a week, let's say you take 1 day off a week at work, so you do 80% and you volunteer 1 day a week at an organization you find to be impactful and meaningful, this can be a great way not only to make a difference in the organization, but also to test out your relationship, your fit with that organization, and they can test out their fit with you, and it's a good foot in the door, so to speak, for getting this first one, getting work at a high impact organization. So we've seen a lot of cases where people have volunteered and then have gone on to work at that organization or some other organization because that first organization gave them a good referral, something like this. I think this is a much better strategy for getting work rather than like applying to a job ad where 200 people are competing with you, for example. You can also join the board of a high impact organization. So this is something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. And in fact, in our programs, people are very surprised to hear this option, or they're like, oh yeah, that's a great option for me. And I never really thought about it. There's been more talk about this in the EA space in the past year. And there are organizations that are dealing with it a bit, but nonetheless, I feel like across a lot of EA organizations, the boards are quite weak. They're quite like one-dimensional, so more on the philosophy side or more like straight up in the EA space and not drawing from the experiences of professionals outside of EA, or not outside of EA, but not working for an EA organization, let's say. So maybe from a law group, from a lawyer who knows what they're talking about with law, rather than like a philosopher who's like desperately trying to figure out what the law is like, which is what I normally see at EA organizations. So this can be a really high impact way to influence organizations. And it's also quite nice because it doesn't take up so much time. And I think it's particularly high leverage because you meet a few times a year. Of course, like your mileage may vary. You can spend more time at organizations, like understanding the organization and getting more involved if you want to. But usually you meet a few times a year. You check the budget and the operations and that the CEO is doing a good job and things like this. So it doesn't take a lot of time, maybe a decent amount of headspace, but it can be a really impactful way to help that organization out. Then there's mentoring and advising. I think this is also really high leverage and doesn't take a lot of time. So I think everybody should have a mentor throughout their lives. Oh gosh, I only have 5 minutes left. I'm rushing through this thing. I think everybody should have a mentor throughout their lives, no matter where you're at. And that person can also be like just a few years your senior. So I think even if you've been working 5 years, you're already in a position to mentor somebody who's just getting out of uni, for example. And you have a lot of information to impart on that person. And you probably have strong diminishing returns. I think probably the first 5 meetings, you'll deliver a lot of your insightful stuff, but these first 5 meetings will be highly impactful. And like if you put an hourly rate on it, I would expect it to be very, very high due to the like high information transfer you're getting. So again, this is like low effort in some sense, high value, and something I think a lot of people can do, especially if you've been working 5 years or more, let's say. And then the final thing I think is not on a lot of people's network or on radar is leveraging your network. So let's say you're on LinkedIn and you see a job post for an animal welfare organization in communications. So I think the normal thing to do is you're like, I'm not into animal welfare, that's not for me, or I'm not a comms person. I like animal welfare, but I'm not into comms, so that's not for me. Done. That's my level 0 thinking that I thought for a lot of my life. Then level 1 thinking is like, okay, do I know anybody who would be a good fit for that role? I can reach out to them. And as you get older, your network will get bigger and you'll have more of these connections. Maybe still you think, no, I don't know anybody who's in comms and animal welfare. But level 2 is then, okay, do I know anybody who knows anybody like that? And you will find in LinkedIn, you're like 2 degrees from almost everybody. So it would be very surprising if you didn't find somebody who fits a lot of roles in this particular case. And so I would encourage you to think about this. This takes 5 minutes, and it could really lead to somebody getting a job that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten, that's better qualified than other candidates that would have gone for the role. And so this is something I think that most people aren't thinking about, most people aren't doing, doesn't cost a lot of time, and can be very high impact. All right, so I made a quick plan at the end for everybody. I think most people, depending, again, with exceptions, I don't want to overgeneralize, but most people could start donating as a strong baseline, even if it's a really small amount. Just getting started in that is something that everybody can do to have impact now. And I really enjoy seeing people give real strong signals that they're committed to EA principles and don't just come to the conference and then talk about stuff. But this is a way to say like, no, I'm actually going to really have impact. So I'd encourage you to do that. And then look at the other paths we talked about and see if you can build a plan to add on to that. So maybe you stay in your private sector job now, but you start donating, and then maybe you find somebody to advise or an organization to advise for that matter. And then kind of in the background, if you're interested in a career shift, you can sort of sketch out what that looks like, what different options are for you, how valuable they are, how impactful they are they a personal fit, and kind of move this ball in the direction of trying to get a job. Again, if that's something you're interested in. And we're here to help you with that. That's the reason our organization exists. So we have templates and things like that. So feel free to talk to me at the conference or at my office hours, or just shoot me an email. And we can try to figure out a plan for you that will help you go on the most impactful path you can. I think I made it on time. And with that, I thank you. I'll take questions for a couple minutes. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me either, like I said, at my email or here at the conference. Thank you. Any questions? I have 1 minute left for a question, so any burning questions? How many people are professionals? Okay, maybe 2/3 of the room. And everybody else are students, I assume then? Okay. Somebody's shaking their hand like this. I'm not sure. Sort of a student. Learning at home or something, autodidactic maybe. Any questions? Anybody? Yes. Yes.
Do you work with corporations, with companies? Because basically they gather a lot of professionals. Do you work directly with companies to impact the bigger amount of people, larger amount of people, and to sell this approach?
We have worked, so we've done 2 things in the past that we're not doing so much now. But one thing we did was we worked with, there are so-called EA workplace groups and EA professional groups. So there's like a workplace group at Alphabet and Meta and all the big organizations you've heard of in tech and consulting and finance. And we worked with the EA group organizers of those groups to facilitate change in their organizations and help them work on a strategic plan. And we also help individuals at companies run fundraisers at the end of the year, so the giving season around the December time. So an employee of the company would then go up and give a pitch to their organization and say, here's why I believe in effective giving. Here are great organizations. It's giving season. Why don't you donate? And so that's an initiative we've worked with at many organizations to date. Time over. Can I take one more question? Oh, it's allowed.
I'm wondering how long does it take on average for a professional to switch? Because you said you were working for professionals to shift from working in an organization that is not necessarily highly impactful to high impact organizations. On average, how long does it take for that?
Ooh, that's a tough question because it's really different depending on the person. So some people take it like a gap year and they make a plan for a whole year and then they really activate after that. Some people search for years and don't come up with anything that's meaningful for them. And then some people switch relatively quickly. So it's really tough for me to say on average. But I'll just say a year. I'll just take the middle of those and say something like a year. I really think, though, something maybe I should have emphasized more is I think people should be very proactive about this. So I think a lot of people like go to the 80,000 hours job board and they're like, okay, no jobs for me, one and done, I'm finished, I'll check next month. But I think a really successful path can look like the volunteering path I mentioned before, or just reaching out to an organization that you care about, trying to deliver some value in an email, even if they don't have a job posting up, and saying like, hey, I'm a product person and I looked at your website and I think the language is very confusing what products you have. Here's a proposal I have about how you should deliver your products, something like this. And when you show that kind of value, organizations might be like, we need a person like this. That wasn't even on my radar because, yeah, as I mentioned a couple times, like a lot of academics in EA, and they don't know kind of the business landscape. So a lot of professionals don't know how to translate what they do into EA organizations. But I would try to translate this and show the value that you have. And this can be like a quicker way to get into an organization. Okay, I think that's it then. Time's up. Thank you, everybody, for being here. As I said, please meet up with me if you want to chat more.